And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I'm your host, Hank Garner. As always, today my guest is Jessie Gaynor, and she has an amazing, fantastic new book. It's called The Glow. And I love this book so much, Jessie. It is, I was trying to tell someone about it the other day, and, I was just piling on effusive praise that was kind of all over the place, and this is really one of my favorite kinds of books, is one that you have a little bit of trouble categorizing. It's social commentary, it's funny, it's all these things, and I love it so much, and I'm telling everyone about it. The new book is called The Glow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I too find that when I really like a book, I just sort of trip over my words. So that is really lovely to hear, and I'm so glad you liked it.
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorite things about books is, and when we're talking, and my Kindle was just rebooting. I was going to show everyone the cover of The Glow. There it is. You can it's available everywhere now. You can go grab it. But one of my favorite things, Jesse, is, when we're talking about books, it's so important to or I feel that a lot of importance is placed on describing where your book fits in the bookstore. And I understand why that's important. You need to be able to tell people where to go to find your book, obviously. But there's something that is kind of magical about a book that doesn't fit neatly into a category, it seems like. Um, so first off, if we're talking about The Glow, how would you describe it to someone who knows nothing about you, knows nothing about your work? What's your elevator pitch for the book?
Yeah, I think I've gotten slightly better at this, but it took me a really long time, and I have to thank Random House's marketing and PR teams for like giving me some help with this. I like to think my biggest above all, I just want people to know that it is my hope was that it was funny. It is like
Yeah,
that was really what I wanted a big takeaway to be.
yeah,
That, it's always weird to say it is funny about your own work, but that is my hope. It has elements of satire, although I don't necessarily consider it a strict satire. It's about the wellness industry, which I think also uh, has a lot to do with the healthcare industry in this country and the
yeah,
sort of the gaps in that, the enormous gaps in that the wellness industry has sort of rushed to fill. It's about kind of what it means to believe in kind of anything.
yeah,
I look specifically at wellness, but it kind of began as like a cultier book, and then I veered more toward wellness. But yeah, it's I think it,
and
I
some people would think they're the same thing.
exactly, yeah. I mean, they have. I think that like the fervor can feel very similar. The fervor
Right.
with which people believe in their macrobiotic diet, and also their actual sort of more recognized religion.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you brought up satire, because I was thinking about this, I don't know, a week or two ago, when I was kind of, I had finished the book, and I was thinking about kind of what it meant to me. And satire is something that I immediately went to. But then I said, this doesn't really feel like, because a lot of satire is kind of over the top, and you illustrate a point by being so over, uh, dramatic about it. And it's not that. It's kind of a subtle, um, poking fun at the reality. And the realities are just very, very prominent and very kind of center stage. And it may seem like a subtle difference, but until you read it, you can tell what the difference is. It's not over the top exaggeration. It's kind of just bringing out the humor in the fact that we take ourselves so seriously. It and as I'm sitting here talking about it, I find it hard to put in words, but
No, I do too, because I people have asked me about, whether I consider it a satire, and and I love satire, so I don't want to
Yeah.
say, but I think it reads more like a satire than I intended it to be because the wellness industry is so easy to is so over the top already
Right.
without going that extra
Right.
mile.
I, I do find it funny that you mentioned that it was that some of these topics are a bit cult like because I find it hilarious that in a society where we're increasingly more secular and we're kind of afraid, maybe afraid is not the right word, but we don't really want to come down one way or the other on religious topics. We will take something that has no religious connotation whatsoever and build a religion out of it, and which is hilarious to me. That's so chock full of things to be poked at.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I saw less of a different. I see less of a difference between people who consider themselves, a member of a mainstream religion or not, than people who are able to really give themselves over to a system of belief, and people who aren't.
Yeah.
Whatever that system of belief is. Not to say that there's obviously there are material differences, but like I
Right.
don't. I find myself it is difficult for me to give myself over to a system of belief, and I think that sometimes it feels like it would be really nice to be able to.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to before the glow. What, and this is a question I love to ask people. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So my mom, when I was a kid, was training to be a therapist. She went back to school, and sometimes she would she would like do therapy games on me. And one of them was, I think I she would draw like a scribbly picture, and I would tell her when to stop, and then I would create a story out of that picture. And very clear cut therapy game now describing it. But for me, the fun part of it was just the story creation. And I think she also saw that that was something that I was interested in, and really encouraged storytelling, and making little stapled books. In high school, I wanted to act, but we also had a one act festival every year where I
Mm.
would write a one act play. And so I moved a little bit more away from acting, which I was not incredible at. And yeah, and then and I focused on poetry in college, and got an MFA in poetry, and then realized that I wanted to write a novel.
Love it. I've known a lot of actors, some successful, some not so successful, that have turned to writing prose, and there seems to be a connection there where when you're an actor, you are part of the process in some way, but when you are an author, you're in control of the entire process, the creation, the execution. Now, of course, we know that when you're publishing, you're going to work with editors and publishers, and more people become part of the process. But there is something to be said about being kind of in sole control of the creative process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most frustrating thing about acting is it is much more difficult to do it under your own steam, in a room
Yeah.
alone. But I do think that there is a connect. I think that there's a connection between the impulse to write fiction and act, and it's like trying on another person, or in the case of a novel, many other people.
Yeah. What drew you to poetry?
Um, I I there's sort of a cynical answer and a less cynical answer.
Okay.
The cynical answer is that I had an early poetry professor who told me I was good at it, and I was like, "Well, I really like being told I'm good at something, so I'm going to pursue
Right.
that." And then I think I think I could have gotten better at fiction, earlier if I had tried harder at it. But it can be alluring to just do the thing that someone told you you were good at right away.
Yeah.
And then the less cynical answer is that I really love, this sort of intense focus on language, that poetry requires. The, like, really micro, line level tinkering is something that I like, which can make writing a novel take much longer.
Yeah. Well, not to be, the dirty capitalist in the conversation, but, when you are pursuing poetry, um, does the market for poetry have any bearing on, how you ply your craft and whether you feel like this is a lifelong pursuit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it I did not wanna teach, so it really became, "Okay, well, poetry will be something I can do, and it will never be something I do in a." I mean, no one does poetry full time,
Yeah.
but people have people who tend to be really serious about it, I think, usually end up teaching in some capacity, and I was not great at that.
Gotcha, gotcha. You got your MFA. How do as having published a novel now, looking back, what did that experience, what tools did you gain from an MFA? And I know lots of people who have pursued the MFA route and then lots of people who have not. And you did, so you can't speak to the experience of not having an MFA, but what kind of tools do you feel like you gathered along the way from that experience?
I think it to be honest, they're all really tools that I could have gotten elsewhere if I had,
Yeah,
I learned to read more widely and read in kind of a really focused way. The thing that an MFA really gives you, if you go to one that is funded specifically, where they pay you to go, is time.
yeah,
And that's something that, few other things will just give you money to write. Nothing in particular, but just like whatever you want. So that's kind of my advertisement for MFAs. It feels like it's less about, craft things that would be impossible to learn elsewhere, and more about just, time and being around people who are interested in writing as well. I think I've people that I met there were early readers of this novel and were just incredibly helpful to that. But yeah, you can also have a writing group.
yeah, true, true.
I'm not anti MFA. I don't think it, at least for me, it didn't make me write a specific way. But I certainly don't think it is an irreplicable experience.
Was there a member or members of the faculty that you feel, handed down some sort of knowledge that you hold precious now? Or was it the community of your peers that you were with that had more of an impact? What
I
kind of
think, yeah, I think the peers are really they are the ones who will shape your experience most. Well, of course, um, I was studying poetry, and I think I had kind of already figured out that I liked fiction more.
yeah,
So it's not fair to the faculty, to say no, really. I mean, I learned a lot about poetry, and fiction now feels much more natural to me. But I do think, kind of, overthinking every line. I don't know if that helped the novel or not, but I did. Um, I thought really hard about every sentence.
well, and when you're writing poetry, you have to, because you have a limited space, and every line has to carry a certain level of impact, and each line has to do something. And with a novel, when you've got 80, 90, 100, 120,000 words, you can kind of meander, you can let sentences build subtlety, and you can take the reader to different places. When you first started writing the novel, how did you start thinking? How did you get your mind to switch from, you know, every sentence having to carry a certain weight to having some freedom and some looseness there that you only get with writing prose?
I think that took me longer than it should have. I think the first drafts of this book might be a little exhausting. Like they're too I think that they're like too it's too much on the sentence level and not enough on the plot level. Like my editor at Random
Mm,
House, we did a lot of editing after I sold the book, and
yeah.
her name is Cleo. She's an incredible editor, and I think a lot of the time she would my understanding of her very kindly phrased note was sort of like, what if here, instead of this like digression about something that we really is like nice but nothing to do with the book, what if instead of that you did some kind of plot? Like, what if you moved the plot?
What if the book had a direction?
Yeah, and it needed it, and that really. The other thing about getting an MFA in poetry is poetry workshops are sort of, they're tricky. For me, a poem is really like stuck in a time that I wrote it, and I find revising poetry really difficult. And so one of the great things about switching to fiction was the ability to revise. And so like it always felt like an enormous gift to have someone reading my work and saying like, here's how we can make it better, and that being true.
Wh- some people might be surprised to hear that you sold a novel to a publisher, and then you work with an editor who is like, okay, we need to, pick this apart, dismantle the story, put, and really work on editing the novel. What was your experience like selling the book to a publisher? What did they like about the book? What did they tell you about what your editing process was going to be like? This was your first novel to publish, so coming from someone who lived in the poetry world, had now written prose, now publishing. ha- what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I think it really differs, and I do think that there are editors and writers who maybe do people will sometimes do more editing with an agent. But I was my agent, her big note when she first read the manuscript was that I should it had two points of view, and she said that I should cut one, and that
Mm,
was tough to hear, but she was right. And so I cut one POV and rewrote, and then she felt like it was ready to go. And I think that what my editor liked about the book when she first read it was probably more about the language than the actual like motion of the plot. I think
mm,
that she thought that there was probably potential in the plot. But I think she liked the poety stuff, which is good, because I do think that was the strength. And I got very lucky to have someone who was willing to really put in the time to, because you can publish a book kind of in any state.
right.
Like it could have gotten published, probably, like they could have put it out into the world as it first was, and it just would not have been nearly as good. And there are like cynical sort of market things like, let's just rush it out because wellness is very hot now. But
Right.
luckily wellness only got more absurd in the years that we
Right.
were editing it, so.
Exactly. Well, having only read the finished product and the single point of view, I'm very curious. What was the other point of view that you had to take out? What was the story like then?
Yeah, so it was the Tom character who runs with the sort of enigmatic cult leader-ish type woman, Cass. He runs the retreat center. And it was the whole half of the section. It's a whole half of the book. It switched back and forth. And I ended up putting back a sort of small section of him telling a story that sort of shifts to his point of view.
Okay.
And having written that, I'm not someone who can ever kind of convince herself to do that level of like, okay, well, I'm gonna cut this down to 5 pages, so I better write 100. But I do think having written 100, it helped write the 5 to 20 so much. So
Gotcha.
I don't know if next time I am doing something, I will ever be able to convince myself to write 100 pages that I know won't make it into the book, but it does help.
I, I heard, I think it was Nicholas Sparks, talk one time, and he said that he, overwrites by like 20,000 words or some that seems like a massive amount, knowing that he will chop that out. And when you first hear that, you're like, why would you on purpose overwork knowing that it's going to come out? But sometimes it's those things that you learn from that seep into the story that unless you've been there through the whole process, you can never see it. But it definitely shows up on the page. It's just in a ethereal kind of sense.
Yeah, no, it was sort of shocking, but I am an underwriter.
Mm,
And
yeah,
so I could only have done that not knowing that it would get cut.
yeah, yeah. I love the character of Jane in this book so much. Where did Jane come from?
Jane, I kind of she's definitely been called an unlikable protagonist, which I do not disagree with, but there have been people who have said, "Oh, I find her to be profoundly unlikable," and then people who have said, "I know I'm supposed to, but like I also find her painfully relatable in a way that I don't quite like."
Yeah, yeah,
So, so that to me, I liked. There are parts of her that are true to my worst thoughts and experiences. And it was very fun to sort of amp those up and just create someone who I knew was going to make people a little uncomfortable in that way, and just hope that there would be some like relatability in the unlikability. But I always think it's more fun to write someone who's a little bit unpleasant.
Well, there's this whole theory in writing, and it was huge in screenwriting a few years ago. The save the cat method, where if you have an unlikable protagonist, have them rescue a cat out of a tree, or something that allows the audience to bind with this protagonist and feel a sense of connection, so that when they do horrible things, at least you can look back and say, okay, but he's really a good guy, because I saw him, rescue the cat out of the tree. So when you have a character that people bristle at, and maybe it's because they see too much of themselves in the character, which is kind of how I think about, if there's a character that I don't like, I start wondering, um am I seeing something of myself in here,
Mhm.
and maybe that's a little too navel gazy, but anyway. What do you do when you have a character that people are not super fond of, but they want to keep turning pages? How do you build that sort of connection with an unlikable character?
Yeah, I think when I was doing the 2 points of view,
Yeah.
I gave Tom a little bit more of the I think I gave him all the likability. He I felt really like tenderly toward Tom, and I wanted him to have like a nice ending. Um, but I think putting him then in giving him, I think often even in life, if there's someone who you don't like, but maybe you find interesting, if another person, if you see another person appear to like them, you're like, oh, okay, well, I will give them a second chance. And I thought that Tom and Jane's friendship was something that I kind of put a lot of that on.
Yeah. Do you see that? or when people read the book, um, do they does it resonate with them that we see so much of kind of this m- uh, social media kind of weird gloss that's put over real life? Like, are people connecting with the story and kind of seeing, the absurdity of kind of what we're dealing with in real life now?
Yeah, interestingly, I have heard from people who consider themselves like a little bit more devoted to wellness in various forms. And they have been connecting with it a lot, which makes me feel good because I did, again, it's the satire question. I didn't want this to be necessarily an indictment of the wellness industry because I think that it's connected to so many other things. And I
Yeah.
think and I don't think that people who believe in wellness are dumb or credulous. I think that like there are a ton of different reasons to believe in anything. And with things that are sort of like alternative medicines, of course there are reasons that people turn to those. And I think if I felt like I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I have a disease that's like incredibly well understood, and everyone is kind
Yeah.
of like, here's the one thing that you need to live. But I
Right.
think if it were less clear cut, I could certainly see myself looking for ways to feel better. And I think, that's kind of what it is. People just looking for ways to feel better. And I don't begrudge anyone that. So I was really glad that people who are more into those things didn't feel like the book was mocking them in any way.
Well, and that's one thing that I kind of got that I realized kind of early on in the book is that a lot of times satire um, almost feels like that you are making fun of someone to their face, but they're not in on the joke. They're like they don't realize everyone's making fun of them. But what you did in this book is you definitely kind of shine a light on some of the kind of ludicrous things that we do without being mean spirited. And I think that's one thing that I appreciated about it is that you kind of allow us to shine a light on and have a good laugh at the things that we knowingly do without just being without being mean. And
Thank
I think
you.
that was a very kind of wholesome thing about the book, if you can say that.
No, that's really nice to hear, and I do think that it was a little bit important in that way for Jane to be the jerk,
Yeah.
because if she's sort of like standing outside, and even if you find her relatable, it's not like she's not necessarily a perfect reader proxy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, after publishing this book, Jesse, where are you? Um, what are you focusing on now? This book has been off your desk for a while, I'm sure, as it goes through the publishing process. Having gone through this writing, revising, publishing schedule, has another project popped up?
I'm sort of in the early stages of working on a book for adults, but set in middle school, because I think middle school is a really formative time, more so at least for me than high school.
Yeah.
And you don't see as many books set there. So I'm hoping to get that going. I had a baby 5 months ago, so that is that has probably been taking more of my attention than writing. But she'll be on her own soon, and
I have to say that I find an adult book set in middle school, extremely fascinating. I can't wait to see what you're going to do with that.
Oh, good. Well, yes, I must get to work on it then.
The Glow is available everywhere now. You can grab it at your local bookstore. Go support local books. If you don't have a local bookstore, we're going to put links in the show notes of this episode where you can grab it from Amazon and pick it up today. It's available everywhere. Jesse, if people are just discovering you and want to follow along with everything exciting that's going on, is there a place where they can connect with you online and follow along?
Yeah, I tweet almost never, but my Twitter handle is my first and last name, Jessie Gaynor. Same with Instagram. I also am a full-time editor at Literary Hub, and I do some blogging there. And yeah, those are kind of my main spots.
Excellent. We'll link those up as well to make it easy for folks to find you. Jesse, this has been so much fun chatting. Everyone, go pick up a copy of The Glow today. Thank you so much for taking time to join us on the show.
Thank you so much, Hank.